Okay, not that many questions, so that's good. I'll continue. Let's take a look at Appendix B, which I put up on the screen on the left-hand side. Now I'm going to make it bigger. Here we go. So basically, Appendix B talks about the timing of the contract. One of the things, and I had some issues with my other handout that was highlighted already, so I'm going to highlight stuff here. The important part is right here. I've underlined it. Let's see if it'll show up. Not showing up on my. Okay. I've highlighted the number of months that's important from Appendix B, making sure that these number of months here in the contract, we did our best to make sure they match whatever's in Appendix A. So that's always important. The other thing that is really important in this section is right here. Costs incurred before the NTP date are not allowable and will not be paid. So I think we've tried to tell you guys that as much as possible. Just another reminder. Uh-oh. Didn't know that was going to happen. Costs incurred before the NTP date are not allowable and will not be paid. This contract's a little bit different if we look at Section 3. Do some highlighting here. Option to extend. When we started this process, our goal was to make these contracts as short as possible to allow you guys to do some work with the funds that were provided. So the city's intention was really for the contracts to be about 3 months. And for a lot of folks, we got to be 3 months. For others, they needed a little more time. So this section really allows the city's intention to be a maximum of 6 months for the contract period. And if you want an extension, you need to request that from us, tell us why, and then get our director's permission. Your project officers will help you with that if possible. But if can, we'd really appreciate it if we don't have to extend contracts. We can just get it done and everybody's happy completing the services and getting their funds in a timely manner. So maximum 6 months possible for the extension. If you have a capital asset purchase, this section tells you about that. It's something a little bit different than our FY14 contract had. And I'll go through some of the highlights. There are 2 triggers that kind of invoke this part of the contract. One is that the cost of the item is either more than $10,000 or more than 10% of the grant amount. And 2 is that the useful life of the whatever you're buying is greater than 1 year. So if you happen to sorry about that. I'm going to go back to an earlier poll question. I guess somebody sent a question if the sound went out. So hopefully you guys can hear me. If you can hear me, please raise your hands. You guys have a hand raising button out there? Well, let me try this. Okay, let's see. Everybody, almost everybody can hear me. Almost everybody raised their hand. Some people still haven't raised their hand. So I'm going to put something on the screen just to make sure I'm communicating as clearly as I can. Actually, I need to ask the reverse question. I'll put all the hands down. And let's see if I put something on the screen if you cannot hear me. Okay, looks like we have one person who cannot hear. A couple people who cannot hear. So for you folks, let me get back to that. I invite you to use the telephone, which works pretty good, and you should be able to hear if you dial into that. Okay, there's 3 people who cannot hear. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but that's part of trying something new. So if those who have their hands raised, if you can dial into the phone number, hopefully that'll work for you. And I'm going to move on to continue the webinar. Okay, somebody's asking how to raise your hand. There should be a button somewhere on the, I don't know what to call it, the console that the GoToWebinar shows on your screen that has a little hand. So if you just push the button, then there you go, you can raise your hand. All right, where was I? Back to Appendix B, looking at the capital asset purchase. So basically there's the triggers of the cost as well as the life of the product. If you invoke those 2 things, then really the major thing that is different for you is found, let's see, down here. Let's see, you know what? As I learn how to use these different tools, so if you do have a capital asset, what happens is after the first year, we will ask you to submit yearly reports about the use of the asset to us and that are due on the final working day of each calendar year. So that's something that if you buy something expensive, something that we will be expecting you to help us out with every year for 5 years. Continuing down to Appendix B, we're moving on to Section 4. And there may be a few of you who actually have to do this. Grant activity involves improvements to real estate. The rules here are very similar to those for the capital asset. You have to keep using the real estate property or the improvements for the same purpose that you signed up for with us. Keep trying to meet the same objectives and not encumber the real estate with any additional mortgages or other kinds of liens unless you get the city's approval. I'll highlight that one as well. And that is pretty much it for Appendix B. Let's see, anything else we want to put? Moving on to Appendix C, this is always the exciting part. This is all about the money. So in Appendix C, you'll see that you guys have a certain amount allotted for your actual costs incurred with the activity. Our intention for this particular grant was that it is intended to be a reimbursement grant. So some of the language that I'm going to highlight here is different than the FY14 contract and even the FY15 contract if you have those. Because this contract was really designed to be a reimbursement grant, we require that the costs that you submit to us on a monthly basis are actually incurred and paid by the grantee. So we go back a little bit later in the training to look at the invoices. We'll talk about the consequences of that. But really, it's a reimbursement grant. Final payment, this stuff is very similar to what's happened in the past. I'll send you an email with the closeout documents, just like I did with the FY14 contract. They'll look very similar. I don't foresee a whole lot of changes in that process. If we continue along Appendix C, this is something that it's in the contract. The city hasn't really exercised it, but it's something that may get invoked at some point, and it's this clause D here. Really, it says, we ask that you submit your final payment request within 90 days after the end of the grant. And unless you have gotten our director's approval to submit it later than that, you are at risk of forfeiting the remaining grant balance if you don't meet the 90-day deadline. So it's something that's in the contracts. We haven't exercised it to date, but something that we may have to at some point. In terms of the allowable costs, somebody did ask a question about administration, so I'll take that in two different parts. There's a couple ways, a couple of things that people look at to cover admin. One is the thing I'll highlight here, called indirect costs, and you guys all know that comes up to no more than 5% of the grant amount. So for this, different agencies view indirect costs in different ways. For some of the bigger agencies, they've actually managed to get a federal agency to agree to an indirect cost rate. It's a very cumbersome thing to have to try and get done, but for some agencies it's worth the time. And basically the feds say, okay, this is the rate that you can charge the feds. Now if you're going to charge us, we're only going to allow you the 5%. But if you have the documentation that you gave to the feds, that can be helpful when we ask for the documentation around indirect costs. Now for agencies that aren't big and have federal indirect cost rates, what we do is we kind of rely on the agency policies for how they define indirect costs as well as how they allocate indirect costs. So if we can get your policies and understand them, we can advocate on your behalf when it comes time to show the documentation. The other part of administration, which is a little bit different than indirect costs, is admin salaries, and this is item number 4 here. Now the grants and aid do allow for 25% admin salaries, and the budget worksheets that we've provided more recently kind of help you show that for the budgets that you've provided to us. Some other terms to note in this section: the city can withhold payments, and we have to let you guys know within 10 days about if we find some deficiencies or compliance issues. We'll notify you about that, and we have 10 days to respond with a plan to help correct those deficiencies. This was in the other contracts as well. Something that's here, something that we may do differently though, is if you don't meet the 10-day deadline, the city may choose to exercise its right to withhold more funds or take other actions. All depends. If we go back to my comments earlier about the monitorings we've done, there's some agencies who did pretty well and some agencies who need some improvement. So depending on the situation, we may invoke these clauses as necessary. Repayment, this has been on all the contracts we've had, and it may be an issue. If we look at the next section, receipt of funds from a third party, this can be a bit complicated sometimes. The whole point of this part of the contract is to avoid double dipping, which means a couple things. If there's two different revenue sources going towards one cost, there should only be one revenue source going towards the cost. For example, let's say Gabe works at the city, and I charge my whole salary to a GIA grant, and then somebody else from outside the city, let's say Hawaii Community Foundation, decides to give the city a grant for my salary. Now I can only charge part of my salary to the city and part of my salary to the foundation. I cannot charge both of them 100% of the salary. And I'm pretty sure agencies don't do this on purpose. If anything, it becomes more a function of agency capacity to keep track of the funds that gets people into trouble. But we do put this contract clause in here just to make it clear that if there are other funds going towards the activities you guys are providing, we expect to see some allocation basis rationale for how the costs are being split up. And it's not just other grant funds. If agencies charge program fees of some kind, that needs to be considered as well. So your project officers can help you with more details about that, but I just wanted to give you the broad overview about that particular clause in the contract. Let's see. Section 5, always an exciting section, authorized signatories. So everybody should, I think everybody provided their signatory documents for the contracts, but when people submit invoices, sometimes they want to assign somebody besides the contract person to actually sign off on the monthly documents. So let's see if I can find my version of that. So if that's the situation for you, and you want to have somebody besides the contract signatory, hold on while I blow this up. We have a form that you can use to designate other people to sign the monthly documents. Basically, it's on your letterhead, it's to our director, and it shows who's being authorized to sign, gives us a chance to have the sample signature, as well as the person who is the signatory for the contract saying that this is okay. So we'll send you an email about that with this form. All right. I think it's time for another quiz. So let's see if So this is related to the NTP discussion I had at the beginning of this section. So please answer correctly. You may spend funds as soon as the contract is executed. True or false? Okay, the answers are coming in. So the correct answer is false. You cannot spend funds as soon as the contract is executed. What you will need is, okay, wrong screen. Sorry about that. You need the notice to proceed. This is the document that allows you to start spending money. And Appendix B starts off with that. You cannot incur any costs until the date in the notice to proceed, which is right here. So for this particular contract, Adult Friends for Youth, they have a 3-month contract, and they can start as of July 1st, 2015. All right. On to the next appendix. We'll discuss the sample invoice a little bit later. Appendix D, special provisions. That is not an issue. Appendix E, you're already participating in the mandatory grant training here. And let's take a look at section 3 of Appendix E. This one, definitely, we had the broad range of responses as we did the monitoring report, the monitoring visits for 20 grantees. So it's not everybody, but it was a sample. And most people had, if there were issues with monitoring, it really revolved around the fiscal section. Like I said, some folks did good, some folks need improvement. But these are the expectations that we have for the financial management system related to tracking the city's costs. Make sure that the records clearly identify the source and application of all the funds used. Remember, I talked about double dipping a little bit earlier. So this helps prevent that or show that the agency is not doing that. Records providing a full description of each activity undertaken. Amount of the city funds budgeted. That's important. This is something that we don't talk about much, but is something that we may be investigating a little bit more because it's something that the city's talking about more, and it's the whole equal opportunity employment. So make sure you guys are taking care of that within your agencies, because if we come to monitor, that is something we will be testing for. Item D is also something that if people had issues, they had some areas of their internal and accounting controls that could use some tightening. For some agencies that dealt with incentives, they lacked inventory control to kind of have a sense of what's coming in and what's going out. And that can be very troubling to folks who are trying to hold grantees accountable. So we found that to be an issue that needed to be addressed. For other agencies, their costs, they kind of viewed it almost like a shoebox in terms of the number of receipts and all the funds just kind of pouring into one pot and pulling receipts out to try and figure out, oh, can we charge this to the grant? Can we charge that to the grant? And that is definitely not internal accounting controls. So we've made recommendations to some of those grantees to improve. And we'll work with those who needed help in those particular areas. One thing that I mentioned a little bit earlier when we looked at the Appendix A, accounting records that are supported by source documentation, in terms of what we'll be asking for on the monthly basis, it really goes to this, some of the source documentation for the costs. So we need that, as well as the G is important, procedures for determining reasonableness and allowability of costs. Having your rationale, having your allocation tables, if you need to use them, is very helpful for keeping everything clear. And I think another thing that we noticed some folks needed help with was just setting cost code, specific cost code for the GIA funds. And if we look further down in the contract, I'll point it out a little bit later, there is a section that talks about needing to keep the grant and aid funds separate. So I'll bring that up as we roll by it in our review of the contract. Status reports. This will be part of our invoice form. We'll be giving you that information just a couple of minutes. At the bottom of here, who to send your documents to when you submit your monthly reports. Here's who you have to send them to. I would also recommend underneath this put attention to whoever your project officer is, so it can help get it to them more quickly. Okay, moving on to section 6. This is something that has become more of an issue at the city as well as the state, and it's compliance. This small paragraph can be very misleading because it talks about all of these things that I'm highlighting, all federal, state, local laws, ordinance, and regulations. So one of the things that's become very top of mind right now is civil rights violations, Title VI, discrimination, and in particular language access. Now, for those of you who do work directly with people who have language, I don't want to say language challenges, but who don't speak English and still want to access some of your very vital services, it's becoming more of an issue that by not having translation and language access services available, we present unconstitutional barriers to them accessing service. And there are several lawsuits going on right now against different government agencies related to this. So we want to learn from experience and make sure everybody's prepared to deal with this. If you guys are already doing it, we congratulate you. If you need more information, I recommend Googling language access Hawaii, and the state has an office related to all language access issues. So that's very important for you guys to consider. And that is just one of the laws that are covered by this seemingly innocuous section of the contract. There's a lot more, but right now the one that a lot of folks in the city and the state are talking about are the civil rights and the language access issues. Earlier I mentioned that there's something in the contract talking about grant monies being kept separate financially. So here's where it says you got to do that. Representations and warranties, we've already taken care of that in the vetting process for your grants. So it's not something that we're going to cover in detail. I think the last thing that I'm going to cover in the contract, no, it's not the last thing, but another important thing I'm covering in the contract is Section 8 of this appendix, non-compliance, suspension, and termination. So basically, if the grantee does any of these things, one, all these different paragraphs here, then the city has all of these alphabets as options in figuring out how to resolve it. Now, it's not something that we go into lightly if we have to invoke these different consequences, but it's definitely something that, because of the contract, we have the ability to do. Our first preference is that we work out any misunderstandings and try and get on the same page. But if we are unsuccessful at being able to do that, these are some of the consequences that can happen: withholding payments, disallowing costs, suspend or terminate the contract, withhold additional grants and awards to the grantee. So like I say, it's not something the city prefers to do, but sometimes we do have to deal with that because of we find issues that we aren't able to resolve successfully with grantees. Moving further along, insurance requirements. I'm pretty sure you took care of all of these as you met with our staff to get your contracts up and running. So we should have all of those. Something that's kind of creeped up for some people, conflict of interest. Basically, if someone is in the decision-making role at somebody who's receiving a grant, they should not be giving contracts to themselves. So decision-making role has broad definition. Take a look at this section to kind of really dig into it. But that's what it's all about preventing. If any of you think you might kind of be into this situation, please let your project officer know as soon as possible. In FY14, we did run into this with a couple grantees, and one just popped up actually a couple days ago for us. So we're trying to figure out how to work it out in the context of the FY14 contract. For this contract, if people run into issues with this section here, numbers 1 and 2, there is a remedy that is listed below. So like I say, if you think this may be an issue for you, conflict of interest, please talk with your project officer and they can give you more details about potential solutions for this. Procurement and contracting. So we've had this before, but I think something we put in differently is that the procurement clause really gets invoked when you pass these triggers of you're spending more than $10,000 or more than 10% of the grant. And if you do have to do this, there's a couple things to consider. One, if you've already named the contractor in your Appendix A and it's been signed and executed by the city at this point, we'll consider that the city's written consent. If you haven't included your contractor within your Appendix A, then you need to go through this process to obtain the city's written consent. And make sure you tell us about your procedure for making selections, how you got the bids, how you are sure that the contractors are successful and they have the potential to do what you need them to do. If you have sole source contracts, you'll need to ask for our director's approval as well and kind of give us an explanation about why you're requesting the sole source contract. There are also procedures for procuring grant-funded assets, which look very much like the records for contracting above. So you'll follow a very similar procedure. Contract administration, this is something that has also been giving us some problems lately. Make sure that you have your procurement and subcontract agreements written, and they must be executed in order for you to pay them with city funds. So make sure you got those things covered. Once again, if you have questions or need more detailed answers about this section, please follow up with your project officer and they can walk you through some of the challenges that we run into with that section. Okay, the last part of the contract that I'm going to talk about is equal opportunity employment. I mentioned this earlier. It is an issue that we feel is very important, and if we come to monitor, we do want to make sure that you have the appropriate policies and practices in place to ensure that there is no discrimination in terms of the hiring or the providing of services that goes on with you guys as grantees. I'm talking more than I thought I would, so my apologies for that. And I think it's time for our next quiz. So this grant is intended to reimburse grantees for the costs that are incurred and paid. True or false? All right, most of you folks are on it. You have the true response. The grant is intended to reimburse grantees for costs that are incurred and paid. Okay, I've been getting some questions about the sample invoice. So we attached one to the email that I sent out to everybody to invite them, and I asked folks to have a copy of the handout to look at as they walk through this. So if you can get that handout now, and I'll show you the electronic version on the screen. So on a monthly basis, here's what we'll be expecting from grantees. Fill in the section like grantee name, appropriate month, agreements. You just got to do that one time. Let's see, let me turn on my highlighter here. So if we look at this section here, if you look at your appendix A that's within your contract, you basically want to copy the two sections I've circled from your appendix A into your monthly invoice form. So they should match, because everybody asks for different kinds of budget deliverable costs and different budgets. But this is the starting place for all of the invoices that we'll need to collect from you. That's the first step. Let me erase those. Okay, so once you fill that out, in the first month, let me turn off something. Basically, this row that I'm playing with now, all be zeros, because in the first month, you won't have requested anything. In the first month, the row I'm highlighting now should really reflect your actual costs. So everything you spent in the first month to get your deliverables done should be listed right here. Then, let's see, all of the shaded cells that are listed here are formulas. So basically, they should fill themselves out. But please double check them just to make sure. We did our best to test them, but sometimes accidents happen. So please test the form, double check your numbers before you send it to us. But our intention was to make these shaded cells so we can get Excel to do the work for us instead of having to recalculate that every time. So that should already be completed after you enter the data in the monthly request side. Deliverable activities, if this is going to be month 1, let's see. This section here should be copied straight from your appendix A. It should match exactly whatever deliverable activities you put there. And then in month 1, you'll just fill this out to show what activities you've done. Once again, we have the shaded cells here on this side, which shaded cells means there's formulas, so that should calculate by themselves. But please double check just to make sure. But that seems pretty straightforward. At the bottom of the document, we have 2 places for people to sign off. And why we've done that is because some agencies have different people overseeing different things. So I'm circling the first part, which is all about the deliverable costs. And it's written in green because it's related to money. So if you're the person who knows about all the costs that went into this and you're certified to sign here, this section tells you all the things you're certifying to. All the costs were incurred, described as, true, accurate, complete, and you saw it. You take responsibility for the truth of the numbers that are sent, included in this document. Some agencies have somebody else who kind of oversees the program side, so that's what the yellow part is for. If you have a separate program person, they can sign here saying that they attest to the truth of whatever documents were submitted. Whatever numbers were reported above, and then they sign and fill out their signature there. For agencies that only have one person who oversees all this, they just sign twice. This is the place where earlier I mentioned that if you need somebody besides the contract signer to sign the document, then you submit that form to us to request permission for people to sign monthly documents. And I'm pretty sure I emailed that in the email I sent out earlier, but we can email that again to people. Okay, so that is what we expect you to fill out in terms of the monthly reporting invoice. For our purposes, we'll just call it the monthly report. There's a part that you report your costs, as well as the part you report your deliverables. So when month 2 comes along, then this is the part where you guys have to calculate this. You basically, okay, you can't just copy and paste there. You have to basically just put the numbers that you reported in month 1 into the section I'm typing out now. And let me show you that. So you fill out this column. And then for the monthly request, you would update with this with whatever your actual costs are for that particular month. That's how you fill out the cost section. In terms of the deliverable section, you just fill out what the issues are for month 2. So that seems pretty straightforward. Every month you have a grant, you just fill in the next column over here, and then at the top part, you update these 2 sections that I will highlight one more time. And you should be good to go. Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity for electronic signatures at this point, so we do need hard copy and original signatures. Let me get down to that. Original signatures in the green and the yellow box. So that's one of the things that you need to submit with your monthly reports. And this, let's go over the other things that you need to submit as well. because the monthly invoice form, hold on. Okay, because the monthly invoice form is, that's my wife peeking through there. Because the monthly invoice form is kind of brief in terms of what it includes, we do need some additional detail related to that. And one thing that we'll be sending out is called our personnel allocation report. Now, since you were the FY14 participants, you did these, so you should be pretty familiar with what this looks like. And we will email this out to you guys. It's basically a detail of what the salaries and wages look like, because on the monthly invoice, they're just compressed into one line. So we typically want more information about this. If the costs are pretty regular every month, then you can just submit this one time. But if the costs fluctuate a lot, we'll ask you to update this every month. So that's the second form you guys are going to need to submit to us. The personnel allocation report. The next thing, I'm going to turn back to our document called the Appendix A. So in Appendix A, we looked at this a little bit earlier, but for all of your costs, we're going to ask you to submit these documents that I just highlighted. So with your monthly invoice, you'll need to make sure you have all of these things. And to help clarify what those things should look like, our fiscal colleagues gave us some samples of what they are looking for. So let me get those for you. And this was one of the handouts I emailed with your invitation email. Hold on while that opens up. So in this worksheet that's attached to the email, we see what Appendix A looks like on that tab. And when I say tab, I'm talking about these things here at the bottom. And then if you have staffing, you're looking for a payroll detail example, click over to that tab. So this could be the personnel allocation report too that you submit to us. If you submit the personnel allocation report, you can do it instead of this one. But here's more instructions about what kind of information we're looking for. And the same with the rest of these tabs along the bottom. If you have expense details example, here's what you can send us to fill that out. If we're looking for canceled checks, here's a sample of what those can look like. And if you just keep clicking along the bottom of the sheet, there are examples for, I think, everything that we've asked for. So I'll scroll through some of that. But when you look at the email that I sent to you to invite you to this, I believe this document is called fiscal documentation. So that should provide you what you need to give to us in terms of the costs. Okay. The last thing on your monthly invoice, let me get to the right document, is in terms of the deliverables, and I've just switched back to the Appendix A that's in your contract. We need you to submit the section I'm about to highlight here. In particular, this one I'm highlighting now, the deliverable documents that you're going to submit with your monthly invoices. So we've already negotiated that with you, and we just need you to attach those along with your monthly invoices. And yes, there's one more thing that you can submit to us on the monthly basis, and that would be a narrative report. Now, because we didn't want to make the form any bigger, what we're going to ask you to do is, if you're going to submit a narrative, or when you submit a narrative report to us, please do so on your letterhead. And some of the things that we're really looking for in the narrative report are, one, highlights of things that happened during the month, or two, if you have challenges, in particular challenges meeting the deliverables for the month, or kind of cost anomalies that happened during that month, we'd like you to include that in the monthly narrative so that we can help understand the documents that you send to us. So if you can send us the monthly report, let's call that the narrative report, on your letterhead, that would be very helpful. The other caution about that is you don't have to write a lot. I mean, we don't expect books or novels about what's going on. A few sentences describing an update is all that we really expect. So we appreciate that. And with that, let's see. Let's go to the next poll question and see how you guys do on this one. Okay, looks like you did very good in that poll. Let's share the results. Everybody got the right answer, I think. Almost everybody. And for some reason, I can't seem to share the poll results. Anyway, almost everybody got the answer correct. So that's the main thing. I'm going to switch back to Appendix A. Uh-oh, looks like I'm having some technical difficulty switching screens now. All right, I think I'm in the right place. So now that you know what you need to submit every month, I did want to bring up a couple things that just came up as I was preparing for this training. One of the things we took out of the original contract was the idea of variance in terms of the budget. So early this morning, I was able to talk with our fiscal officer as well as our director. And one of the things we're going to do for variances because we realize that budgets are just a plan, and the plan does not always match reality. So we are going to allow up to a 10% variance in terms of the total cost of the budget. So let's say the budget we have on screen now, $1,600. If we use that as the budget for this particular grantee, that means you have $160 leeway in any of the budget lines that you've filled out. Because we did not put a provision into the contract where you can amend to move the monies around, we are just going to operate on the 10% variance principle. So the good thing is you don't need to amend your contracts to take advantage of the variance. The challenge is if you exceed the variance, then you will not be able to access the funds. That's the decision we've made today. So I wanted to give you guys that information. And very soon we'll get an email from the DCS director or maybe the deputy director authorizing that particular fact for this contract. The other thing that we removed in Appendix A of this contract is the idea of grace. So in the section I put on the screen now, let me make it bigger so everybody can see it better. What I'm showing in the first two columns, okay, the column I just wrote the yellow circle above now, this is what the actual was for the month. And the column I'm highlighting now, let me make some changes there. Hold on. So let's say Appendix A says that you should have delivered one deliverable for each of these rows. But your actual shows that you were only able to deliver 3 out of the 6. What this will mean for your payment for that month is because you were only able to deliver half of the deliverables, you'll be entitled to reimbursement for half of your actual costs for that month. If you're able to make up your deliverables in future months, then you can definitely go back and recoup the costs that we did not reimburse you for because you didn't meet your deliverables for that month. So let me run through that one more time. If Appendix A says you had to deliver 6 deliverables for the month, but you're only able to deliver 3 for that month, what we'll do as the city is revise your payment to reflect only half of what you're asking for. And then if you're able to make up those deliverables in future months, you'll be able to access whatever funds we did not reimburse you for originally because the deliverables were below the expected amount. And once again, this will be clarified in an email from our director coming out to everybody. So I think that's all I have on my side. Let me go through the questions and see if I can answer some of these that have popped up. So someone asked the question, what is the notification document that will detail the reason for withholding payment? This will typically come in the form of an email from your project officer. So like I said, it'll be a discussion. We'll try to get clarification and get on the same page if at all possible. But if we cannot reach that point, then we will withhold payment. Somebody's asking a more technical accounting question, which I have to think about a little more to answer. So that one we might provide a written response later. Somebody asked, for cost documents, will hard copies be turned in or can it be submitted electronically? Unfortunately, the city doesn't have the capacity to receive the documents electronically and approve them electronically. So we do require the documents to be hard copies. Let's see if I have other questions that I can answer at this point. Okay, somebody asks, can the final report be the final invoice? That one I'll need to research a little bit more before I can give an answer. If I make sure I'm fair to everybody. And I think those are all the questions that I can see on the board other than the technical accounting question. Love this question. What will the turnaround time be for payments? I must tell the truth. I cannot give you a timeline. All I can tell you is the first one will probably take longer because what we want to do is get everybody on the same page. And my hopes is that once we do that and establish that with the first payment, the next payments will go through more smoothly. Good question, and I wish I had a more discrete answer I could give you or a more concrete answer I could give you. But I do not want to make things up because I need to be honest. And that seems like all the questions. So thank you so much for participating in my first webinar. I went too long. My apologies for that. And if you have more specific questions, please contact your project officers. Thanks again. This is Gabe signing off.